Coming up on Primetime News, the U.S. Federal Reserve keeps its key rate at near zero, easing uncertainties in the global stock markets, including Korea's. The Japanese government aims at pushing through controversial security bills to expand its military's role, despite political and public protests. Plus, Korea's producer prices hit their lowest point in 5 years due to continuing low global oil prices. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello and welcome to Primetime News on this Friday, September 18th. I'm Hwang Ji-hye.
And I'm Daniel Choy. Thank you for joining us. Let's begin with the highly anticipated economic news out of the U.S.
The Federal Reserve has decided to keep its benchmark interest rate unchanged at near zero, citing slow inflation growth. Our Kwon Soa has the details.
The speculation is over, for now at least. The U.S. Central Bank froze its key interest rate Thursday following a two-day policy meeting with only 1 out of 10 committee members opposing the move. This despite the U.S. economy on a recovery track through robust spending and declining unemployment. Fed Chairwoman Janet Yellen said she expects the U.S. economy to continue to perform well, but that recent global market volatility and other factors are delaying what would be the first rate hike in a decade.
Inflation, however, has continued to run below our longer-run objective, partly reflecting declines in energy and import prices.
Yellen said a rate liftoff will come when there is more confidence of inflation rising to 2%, the previous target of the central bank. U.S. inflation currently stands at around 1.2%. Analysts say the U.S. also had to consider effects on developing countries, as a hike would have crushed the purchasing power of developing nations.
If we have the emerging markets starting to struggle and we're not able to export goods and we're not able to create some sort of global inflation by a growing economy around it, that's going to be trouble for the U.S. economy as well.
Experts say the Fed's decision has lifted uncertainties for now in those emerging markets, including Korea, which dealt with a lot of foreign capital outflow in recent weeks.
Even if the interest rate increases later on, it will happen gradually, so Korea won't be affected that much.
There was positive reaction to the freeze in most Asian stock markets Friday, including Korea's benchmark Kospi and tech-heavy Kosdaq, while U.S. and European stock markets saw some setbacks. Korea's central bank chief said there could be a chance of a U.S. hike in October or December, with questions remaining on whether Korea will also raise its key interest rate this year. Kwon Soa, Arirang News.
Japan's 70 years of pacifism looks set to go up in smoke.
That's right. A set of controversial security bills passed a key parliamentary committee on Thursday.
This despite widespread protests outside parliament and scuffles inside. Japan's ruling coalition led by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is pushing to have the upper house approve the bills. Our Lee Soon reports.
Japan's upper house panel has approved controversial new legislation allowing the deployment of troops abroad for the first time since World War II. Opposition party members pushed and shoved to prevent the bill's advance onto the full session at the upper house, but to no avail. The ruling Liberal Democratic Party, led by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, skipped the scheduled question session after finally forcing the bills through.
We absolutely cannot accept this. It truly ignores the voice of the people.
The committee's vote clears the way for the bill to go to the upper house of parliament for final approval. The opposition vowed to submit a vote of no confidence to delay the legislation until the Diet disperses on September 27th. Abe's ruling coalition enjoys a two-thirds majority in the upper house, and it's expected that the legislation will be approved by parliament. Meanwhile, thousands of anti-military protesters gathered outside the parliament shouting "Scrap war legislation."
All of a sudden, a parliament member got up and security legislation was passed. I felt a strong sense of anger and uncertainty.
Despite opposition from many politicians and the population, Abe's government maintains that the revised legislation is vital for dealing with the modern challenges Japan is facing. If the upper house refuses to take up the bills, a second vote in the lower house can pass them into law with a 2/3 majority. 이수은, Arirang News.
With the reunions of families separated by the Korean War scheduled for the end of next month, Seoul's Unification Ministry says there are no major problems with the venue. A South Korean inspection team took a 2-day checkup at facilities in the Mount Kumgang resort earlier this week. The ministry is planning to send workers soon, though, as some repairs need to be done. Mount Kumgang facilities have hardly been used since 2008, when Seoul suspended tourism after the deadly shooting of a South Korean tourist by a North Korean soldier. The U.S. remains resolute on the denuclearization of North Korea. While China could lead the way to achieve that goal, senior U.S. military officials expressed concerns that Beijing, the traditional ally of Pyongyang, may be losing its influence over the communist state. Connie Kim reports.
The United States says it'll take all necessary measures to denuclearize North Korea. This was a comment made by spokesperson for the U.S. State Department John Kirby on Thursday, as he elaborated on U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry's remarks the previous day. Kerry said it may take more than economic sanctions to end North Korea's nuclear threat, as Pyongyang is already economically isolated in the international society. Kirby warned North Korea of further isolation unless it gives up its nuclear missile programs, and added that the ball is now in their court. Fresh tensions have arisen on the Korean peninsula after North Korea earlier this week hinted at a possible launching of satellites and said it's ready to conduct a nuclear test in the near future. There has been speculation that Pyongyang could fire a long-range rocket next month to mark the 70th anniversary of the North's ruling Workers' Party. Washington, meanwhile, is concerned that China, North Korea's longtime ally, has less influence over the reclusive regime compared to the past. U.S. Pacific Command Chief Admiral Harry Harris told a Senate hearing on Thursday that China's influence on North Korea is waning. Citing Chinese officials, U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense David Shear echoed the view, saying China's influence has been limited under the Kim Jong-un regime. In what could be an indication of weakening ties, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has not held a summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping since he took power in late 2011. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, North Korea reiterated its stance to launch a long-range rocket despite much international criticism against it. North's state-run Korean Central News Agency defended Pyongyang's planned satellite launch Friday, calling it a symbol of the regime's sovereignty. The North stressed that the satellite launch falls under peaceful space research, which is rightfully allowed under the United Nations standards. It went on to say that if enemy forces continue to interfere with the North's plan for space development, it will only respond with a stronger provocation.
Back here in South Korea, Korea's rival parties were unified in their denouncement of North Korea's apparent threats. The regime plans to conduct a rocket launch and nuclear test around October 10th, which marks the 70th anniversary of its ruling Workers' Party. Our Ji Myung-gil tells us more.
The ruling Saenuri Party says North Korea's provocative acts will only increase the country's economic and political isolation, and warned of stern punishment if threats are put into action.
North Korea's threats will only cause further isolation from the international community. South Korea and the international community will firmly respond to any threats from the North.
The North has claimed it has the right to conduct space research by launching satellites, but experts view this as a cover for intercontinental ballistic missile tests. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy also urged North Korea to refrain from irresponsible provocations, which could undermine fragile inter-Korean relations.
North Korea should not dampen the current mood of inter-Korean relations. If it commences with a rocket launch and nuclear tests, it will be violating UN resolutions and will bring instability to the Korean peninsula. We urge the North to exercise restraint.
The opposition bloc urged the North to adhere to the September 19th joint statement from 2005. once hailed as a historic deal to end the North nuclear program made during the fourth round of six-party talks in Beijing. At last month's inter-Korean deal to defuse military tensions, Seoul agreed to suspend its loudspeaker propaganda broadcasts, criticizing North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, under the condition that no abnormal situations take place. The deal implied that the loudspeaker operations could resume in the event of military provocations from North Korea. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
South Korea's main opposition, Doom Politics Alliance for Democracy, celebrated the 60th anniversary of the founding of its precursor, the Democratic Party, established in 1955. NPAD leaders and party members joined in the commemoration ceremony on Friday at the National Assembly. There was also a photo exhibition documenting the party's history. Since its foundation, it has been synonymous with the main opposition until the late 1990s under former President Kim Dae-jung, launching a 10-year rule inherited by former President Roh Moo-hyun until the year 2008.
President Park Geunhye's approval rating has remained above the 50% mark for 3 weeks, something we've not seen since the Sewol ferry disaster in April last year. Gallup Korea showed her approval rating reaching 54% in the first week of September, before dropping down to 50% the following 2 weeks. This comes after diffusing military tensions with North Korea and her trip to China to attend the World War II Victory Day parade. President Park struggled with low approval ratings for over a year. She was criticized for a number of issues, including a tax scheme fiasco and mishandling of the MERS outbreak. Korea's producer prices have dropped every month for over a year now. The latest data shows that prices slid by 4.4% on year in August, due largely to low global oil prices. Our Park Se-young has the details.
Korea's producer prices have dropped to their lowest in 5 years, declining at the fastest rate since February of 1999. The Bank of Korea said Friday the producer price index came in at 100.88 last month. This is down 4.4% from the previous year, extending its downward streak for the 13th straight month. The central bank attributed the slide to falling global oil prices, which have plunged over 30% from a year earlier. In August, utilities, namely electricity, gas, and tap water fees, dropped a combined 10.6% from the previous year. The price index covering manufactured goods was over 7% lower on year, while the index for agricultural products gained 4.4%. The producer price index is a barometer for future consumer inflation. The change in the index is commonly reflected in consumer prices a month or two later. Korea's consumer price growth remained weak, with inflation standing below 1% for the 9th consecutive month in August, also driven by low global oil prices and slack demand. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
Korea is fast becoming a mover and shaker in the lucrative trainer fighter jet market. The country has inked a multi-million-dollar deal with Thailand, and according to our Kim Hyun-bin, a role reversal may be in the making, as Korea could be selling these machines to the U.S.
Korea will sell 4 of its T-50 trainer jets to the Thai government in a deal worth some $110 million. Korea Aerospace Industries says it will deliver the jets within 30 months of the contract, which was signed on Thursday. The jets will likely replace Thailand's aging fleet of L-39 jets that the Southeast Asian country has been using for the past 3 decades for mostly training purposes. With the deal, there's a high possibility Bangkok will purchase a further 20 T-50 jets in the future. Kai says the deal further boosts Korea's reputation as a top regional producer of high-level trainer jets. Thailand becomes the 4th country to take the T-50 after Indonesia, Iraq, and the Philippines. Kai and the U.S. defense firm Lockheed Martin finished development of the jets in 2005, pouring some $1.7 billion into the project. Experts also believe Korea could start to make inroads into the highly lucrative U.S. market, as Washington is planning to acquire 1,000 trainer jets worth more than $32 billion. The U.S. is expected to announce its selection in 2017. Korea Aerospace Industries, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Northrop Grumman are among the defense companies competing for the piece of the pie. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
It will be a hard fact to argue that Korea made the fastest transition in the world in terms of smoothly making a changeover from aid recipient to aid giver. One of the successes behind Korea's such transition is, of course, Korea's education policies. And now Korea is sharing its experience with the world through the so-called Official Development Assistance. And a conference was held today to discuss how to take this further. Our Oh Soo-young reports.
Korea was one of the world's poorest countries after the Korean War, heavily dependent on international aid. With rigorous educational reforms, the Korean government invested extensively in human capital, which fast-tracked the country's modernization. Now Korea is providing educational aid for developing countries as part of the initiative known as Official Development Assistance, or ODA. And to further develop ODA projects and highlight the importance of Korea's educational assistance around the world, the Ministry of Education opened a conference on Friday, attended by some 400 education leaders, NGO experts and members of the public.
With its know-how in development, endless innovation and motivational spirit, Korea is highly successful in working with developing countries, especially in education.
Educators from abroad also remarked on the strength of the Korean curricula.
While studying education here, I noticed that Korean education features many interactive learning programs and field trips. I hope to apply these teaching methods in the classroom when I'm back in Vietnam.
Throughout the discussions, experts presented various cases of Korea's educational support in different regions of the world, sharing success stories as well as areas that still need to be improved. Participants agree Korea's education ODA must be expanded to help other countries build human capital to reach sustainable development. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Shifting gears now, Vans, a brand big on skateboarding and fashion and style, celebrates its 50th anniversary next year. Knowing full well countries like Korea determine what's hot, what's not, and what's next in terms of style, the brand is turning its focus on Asia. Kim Ji-hye sat down for a face-to-face with Vans' marketing manager.
What started as a rubber company in the U.S. state of California has now grown into the world's leading action sports brand and a multi-billion-dollar business soon to celebrate its 50th anniversary next year. The brand is Vans, very well known around the world, especially in Europe and North America, says Brian Smith, the national marketing manager of Vans Korea.
A season with no waves. And what were the surfers going to do? They're going to take it to the streets, and they started skateboarding. And those kids, they didn't wear any shoes because they were surfers. So when they would skate down the hill, they didn't have any shoes on their feet. And then someone picked up a pair of Vans and they realized that the bottom was perfect for skateboarding.
But with skateboarding no longer leading popular culture, the brand had to find a way to reinvent itself. To do so, and as part of its growth strategy, Smith says the brand's focus is to turn to markets in the Asian Pacific region. In particular, Vans designed Seoul as an inspiration.
Seoul, Korea, Seoul specifically is an incredibly important part of our plans, just because we know that it's so influential from music to fashion to creative culture overall, that what we do in Seoul tends to influence markets around the region, and there's a lot of like-minded people.
The Korean capital city is hosting the House of Vans promotional event as part of its 2-month Asian tour this year.
It hosts musical events, and there's a do-it-yourself corner for the arts if you're not a fan of skateboarding. The event serves as a window for Vans and its fans to see how the brand could evolve with the times, utilizing its ability to cope with the changing cultural trends. Anyone could participate in the 3-day event held in Seoul's Dongdaemun Plaza this weekend. Kim Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Now for international news headlines, we turn to our Bruce Harrison at the News Center.
Today's focus, refugees push their way through as Croatia closes its borders with Serbia. Taliban gunmen kill at least 17 people at an air base in Pakistan. And Chile declares a state of emergency following a fatal earthquake.
Bruce, initially there was some optimism about safe havens and homes for many refugees, but now we see more and more borders shutting down. What's going on?
Ji-hye, the masses of refugees have simply overwhelmed governments, some afraid of the effect an expanding population would have on their societies. Croatia briefly allowed passage from Serbia, but closed its crossings yesterday. Refugees, though, are still getting through. Croatian police have struggled this week to deal with the mass influx of refugees, but for most, Croatia is just a stop on their journey as they hope to reach parts of Western and Northern Europe.
I didn't expect it will be this reaction from Europe countries about refugee, because they don't help. If they will not help, maybe they will not open the door at the first, not open the door, then close the door.
Scuffles broke out on Croatia's border today as migrants waited for tickets at a bus and train station. For now, many just hope to reach Slovenia, a part of Europe's border-free travel zone. Hundreds are still camped out at the Hungary-Serbia border, which closed earlier this week. And efforts to enter Hungary through Croatia will be short-lived. Hungary is building a second fence along its southwest border. Taliban gunmen have killed at least 17 people at an Air Force base in Pakistan. The fighters stormed the base this morning in the deadliest attack on a military installation this year. A military spokesman said 16 of those dead were killed during morning prayers at a mosque. A captain also died leading the counterattack against the fighters. The number of gunmen who entered the base and the number of those killed has not been confirmed.
Reportedly, there were 7 to 10 attackers who may have been killed. Nevertheless, a search operation is still ongoing.
The number of attacks in Pakistan has fallen significantly this year, but militants still seek out high-value targets. Last month, the provincial official was among 16 killed during a suicide attack at his home. Chile has declared a state of emergency in the coastal town of Coquimbo a day after the nation was struck by an 8.3 magnitude earthquake. Local media report President Michelle Bachelet made the declaration yesterday following a visit to the town. The government says hundreds of homes were damaged so badly that residents were unable to return a day after the quake, and nearly 90,000 homes remain without electricity. The quake, the strongest in the world this year, killed at least 11 people. The government has ordered evacuations of coastal areas, seeking to avoid a repeat of the 2010 quake, which authorities' slow response was partly blamed for a large number of deaths. And those are your stories tonight. Have a great weekend.
Hope you're enjoying the splendid autumn weather we are having these days, which will continue into the weekend under a fair amount of sunshine, and the highs will be hovering in the upper 20s here in the capital. So on that note, let's take a closer look at the readings for tomorrow. Seoul will start off at 17, but later on will rise to 28, while Daegu and Busan will be peaking to 26 and 27 for Gwangju. And as for the other regions, Jeju and Jeju Island will see a high of 27 and 24, while Dokdo rises to 21. Now, the pleasant autumn conditions will continue next week and into the long-awaited Chuseok holiday weekend. And you know, when it comes to autumn, we can't help but think of the colors representing the season. And yes, I'm talking about the fall foliage, which is expected to arrive a couple of days earlier than last year. And Mount Seorak might see the first changing of the leaves as early as next Friday. But the peak fall leaf season is still more than a month away. Well, that's all for the weather. Good night.
And that's primetime news for you this week. Thank you for staying with us.
Have a great weekend, and we will be back next week, same time. Goodbye for now.